"Everyone,
I
go
meant the
ahead
real
and take
one."
your seats," his mother announced to the room. "The bride will be down shortly." Zara stepped forward. "I am already here." The room turned. Confusion
already
passed
here.
across 200 faces. His mother's smile did not move. "Oh," she said, "I meant the real one." And that was when the doors at the back of the hall opened and his ex walked in, wearing white. Zara didn't cry. She couldn't, because looking at that dress, she realized something even worse than the theft. Someone had helped make this happen. Not one person, not one lie, a chain of small betrayals, each one quiet enough to deny, each one wrapped in the language of family and tradition, stretching back further than Zara had ever allowed herself to imagine. And somewhere in that hall, surrounded by 200 guests who thought they were watching a wedding, the man she loved was about to learn that everything he believed about his own family was incomplete. This is her story, and his, and the woman standing in the doorway who never should have known what that dress felt like against her skin. 6 months before that hall went silent, Zara Bennett stood in a downtown Chicago law office holding a job offer that would have changed her life. Senior counsel, International Trade Division, relocation package to Singapore. She had worked 4 years for that letter. She read it twice, folded it, and did not tell anyone for 3 days. On the 4th day, she sat across from Jin Ho at a small Korean barbecue restaurant on Lawrence Avenue, the kind of place his family had been eating at since before he was born, and she told him. "I got the Singapore offer," she said quietly. Jin Ho set his chopsticks down. "The one you interviewed for in March." Zara nodded. "Senior counsel, it is everything I wanted 3 years ago." "And now?" he asked. "Now I am not sure it is everything I want anymore," she said. Her voice did not waver, but her hands, folded in her lap, gripped each other tightly. "I have spent 2 years trying to become part of your family. I am not ready to walk away from that, to chase something I wanted before I knew what this could be." Jin Ho reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to decide tonight." "I already decided," she said. "I am staying." She did not tell him that she had already declined the offer that morning. She did not tell him that the recruiter had asked, almost gently, if she understood what she was giving up. She only smiled and let him believe the decision had been harder than it was, because the truth that she would have chosen him over anything felt too large to say out loud in a restaurant full of strangers. What Zara did not know that night was that Jin Ho's mother, Mrs. Han Soo-jin, had already begun a conversation 2 weeks earlier that would quietly shape the next 2 years of Zara's life. A conversation Zara would not learn about until it was far too late to matter. "Soo-jin, do you honestly... She is not one of us," her sister Kyung-hee had said over tea in Soo-jin's kitchen. "Jin-ho needs a wife who understands what it means to carry the Han name, not someone who has to be taught." Soo-jin had stirred her tea slowly. "I know exactly what she is," she said. "A distraction, nothing more. He will grow tired of teaching her our ways eventually, and when he does, someone familiar will already be standing there." Kyung-hee had raised an eyebrow. "You mean Mireille?" Soo-jin had not answered directly. She had only smiled, the way she always smiled when she had already decided something and simply needed the world to catch up. Mireille. The name would come to mean more to Zara than she could have imagined in those early months, when Jin Ho still spoke of his childhood friend only in passing, a girl he had grown up next door to in Seoul before his family emigrated, a friendship that had faded into occasional holiday messages and nothing more, or so Zara believed. For the first year, Zara did everything right. She enrolled in Korean language classes on Tuesday evenings after work, sitting in a community center classroom with a notebook full of vocabulary she practiced alone in her apartment, determined to greet Jin-ho's grandmother the first time they met. She learned to make kimchi from scratch after watching 7 separate videos and ruining 2 batches, finally presenting a jar to Soo-jin at a family dinner with the kind of hope that made her hands shake slightly as she set it on the table. "This is very good," Soo-jin had said, tasting it with a small nod, for someone who did not grow up making it. It was not an insult, not quite, but it was not the warmth Zara had hoped for either, and she had learned over those months to recognize the particular shape of Soo-jin's approval, always measured, always qualified, always delivered in a way that reminded Zara she was being evaluated rather than welcomed. She endured it because she loved him, and because she believed, the way people in love often believe, that consistency would eventually be rewarded with acceptance. She was wrong. 14 months into their relationship, Zara sat in the waiting room of a Chicago hospital while doctors ran tests on Soo-jin, whose blood pressure had spiked dangerously during a family dinner Zara had helped prepare. Jin-ho was 2 states away, closing a deal that could not wait, unreachable for 6 critical hours, and it was Zara who sat beside Soo-jin's bedside that night, holding her hand through a translator app when the pain made Korean words easier for Soo-jin to reach for than English ones. "You did not have to stay," Soo-jin said quietly, once the sedatives had settled and her breathing had evened out. It was nearly 3 in the morning. Zara did not let go of her hand. "Where else would I be?" Soo-jin turned her head slightly on the pillow and studied Zara's face for a long moment, an expression Zara could not quite read, something between calculation and, briefly, something softer. "You are very devoted," Soo-jin finally said. "It is admirable." It was the kindest thing Soo-jin had ever said to her. Zara held on to that sentence for months afterwards, replaying it during the harder moments, using it as proof that the distance between them was closing. She did not know that 3 days after being discharged, Soo-jin sat in that same kitchen with Kyung-hee and said something entirely different. "She is convenient," Soo-jin said, sipping tea as though the hospital had never happened. "Devoted women make excellent placeholders. They ask for very little, and they wait patiently for whatever we allow them to have." Kyung-hee frowned. "That be cruel, even for you." "It is honest," Soo-jin corrected. "Mireille will be finishing her residency in Chicago by spring. It would be foolish not to let circumstances align themselves." "You are engineering circumstances," Kyung-hee said. Soo-jin's expression did not change. "I am simply making sure the right door stays open." Zara felt none of this happening around her because it was built deliberately to be invisible. A dinner invitation extended to Mireille the same week Zara was traveling for work, framed afterward as an unfortunate coincidence. A photograph from that dinner that somehow made its way into a family group chat Zara was not part of, one Jin-ho only saw weeks later and dismissed as nothing, old friends catching up. A comment from Soo-jin dropped lightly into conversation at a birthday dinner about how nice it was that some women understood exactly what a family like theirs required, no explanation needed, no leash necessary. Zara heard that comment. She sat with it in silence for the rest of the evening, smiling when smiling was expected, and later, in the car, Jin-ho asked her what was wrong. "Nothing," she said. "I am just tired." She had already learned by then the particular exhaustion of choosing peace over confrontation, of deciding that raising the comment would only make her sound insecure, jealous, difficult, all the things she had promised herself she would never become in this family. So she swallowed it, the way she had swallowed dozens of smaller moments before it, each one small enough to excuse alone, and each one slowly teaching her that her place in this family was something she had to keep earning, never something she had already secured. She did not know, could not have known, that somewhere across the city, Mireille was finishing that residency exactly on schedule, exactly where Sujin had positioned her to be, and that the woman Zara had been quietly competing against without ever officially knowing it was already being folded back into the family Zara had spent 2 years trying to join. The proposal came on a Tuesday evening in October, in the small garden behind Jin Ho's childhood restaurant, the same restaurant where Zara first told him about the Singapore offer she never took. He did not use a ring box. He used his grandmother's ring, wrapped in a handkerchief his mother had, or so he believed, offered him to help prepare. "I want you to have something that has been in this family for 3 generations. He said, kneeling in the cold October air, his breath visible between them. "Because I want you to understand, this is not just me choosing you, it is my family's history choosing to continue with you in it." Zara cried then, real tears, the first time she had let herself cry in front of him in over a year, because for one evening she believed every word of it completely. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes." What neither of them knew, standing together in that garden, while Jin Ho's father watched from the restaurant window with an expression Zara would only understand months later, was that the handkerchief wrapped around that ring had come from Sujin's own dresser, the same drawer where Sujin kept the fabric swatches for a wedding dress she had already begun designing for an entirely different bride. Because Sujin had never planned to lose. She had only ever been waiting for the right moment to remind everyone, gently, patiently, and without ever raising her voice, exactly who she believed belonged in that dress. And 6 months later, standing in a hall full of 200 guests who had come to watch Zara become Jin Ho's wife, Sujin would finally make that belief impossible to ignore. She said nothing. What was there to say? It was true. She did have to be spoken to slowly. She had chosen that struggle, and she did not regret it. But hearing it named out loud in front of everyone, in that particular tone Sujin used when she wanted a comment to land without appearing to be an attack, made something in Zara's chest tighten in a way she had felt before and never fully learned to ignore. Mireille, for her part, did not seek any of it out at first. That was the part that made it work. She came to 2 family dinners that winter, both at Sujin's direct invitation, both times seated, quietly, closer to Jin Ho than protocol required. She laughed at his old jokes, the ones from childhood that Zara had never been present for and could never fully understand no matter how many times they were explained to her afterward. "You two were something else back in Seoul," Jin Ho's aunt said one evening, smiling between them. "Remember the summer you both nearly got arrested sneaking into that palace after hours?" Jin Ho laughed, a real laugh, unguarded. "I forgot about that." Mireille's eyes met his. "I never did." Pause. It was a small moment. Nothing was said that could be repeated as evidence of anything. But Zara sat across the table, holding her water glass a little too tightly, and understood in the quiet way a person understands weather changing before the first drop of rain falls, that something was being rebuilt in front of her, one shared memory at a time, and she had no memories to offer in exchange. She mentioned it to Jin Ho only once, carefully in the privacy of their apartment. "Your mother invites Mi-Ray a lot," she said, keeping her voice light, testing the water rather than diving into it. Jin-ho looked up from his laptop, genuinely confused. "She is an old friend. Why does that bother you?" "It does not bother me," Zara said quickly, and heard, even as she said it, how untrue it sounded. "I just noticed it, that is all." He set the laptop aside and pulled her closer. "You have nothing to worry about," he said. "I am marrying you, not her, not anyone else." Soft, reassured exhale. She believed him. She wanted to believe him, and belief, when it is wanted badly enough, has a way of explaining away almost anything. What she could not see, what she would not see for months, was the conversation that happened the following week, when Mi-Ray sat across from Soo-jin in that same kitchen, and Soo-jin placed a small velvet box on the table between them. "I do not understand what you are asking me to do," Mi-Ray said quietly, looking at the box without touching it. "I am not asking you to do anything," Soo-jin said. "I am simply reminding you that the door has not closed. It never had to." "He is engaged, Soo-jin," Mi-Ray said, "to someone else." "Engagements end," Soo-jin said simply. "Marriages that begin on unstable ground end more often than people admit." Mi-Ray pushed the box back across the table. "I will not be part of destroying his relationship." "I am not asking you to destroy anything," Soo-jin said, her voice softening into something almost maternal. "I am only asking you to remain present, to let him remember what a real partnership with someone who understands this family actually feels like. What happens after that is not something either of us controls." It was, Zara would later understand, the most honest thing Soo-jin ever said to anyone in that entire 2 years, because it was true. Soo-jin never once told Mi-Ray to lie, to seduce, to scheme. She only created proximity, again and again, patiently, and trusted proximity to do the rest of the work on its own. And slowly, across that winter, it did. Mi-Ray stopped correcting people when they called her his date at family gatherings. She stopped mentioning when Zara was in the room that she had once dated someone else entirely and had no real interest in reopening old feelings. She began arriving 15 minutes early to dinners, giving herself time alone with Jin-ho and his mother before Zara finished work and joined them. Small windows of intimacy that cost nothing and were never technically improper, and were, each one, a quiet crossing of a line she had once refused to cross at all. By March, she had stopped pushing the velvet box away. Zara noticed the shift before she could name it, a softness in Jin-ho's voice when Mi-Ray's name came up that had not been there in October. A photograph again in a group chat, this time of the two of them at a restaurant Zara did not recognize, captioned only "Old Friends," though Jin-ho had told Zara he was working late that night. She confronted him about the photograph, calmly, the way she confronted everything. "You told me you were working," she said, setting her phone on the table between them. "I was," he said, frowning at the photo. "Mi-Ray stopped by the office. We grabbed food nearby. It was nothing, Zara." "It does not feel like nothing," she said quietly. "It feels like something I am the last to know about every single time." Jin-ho reached for her hand, and she let him take it, though something in her had already begun quietly to prepare itself for a truth she was not yet ready to face directly. "You are the one I am marrying," he said. "Please do not let my mother's opinions turn into something between us that does not actually exist." Zara wanted more than anything for that to be the whole truth. She did not know that 4 days later, Soo-jin would sit alone in her sewing room, surrounded by ivory silk and antique lace, the kind that had clearly been in the family for generations, carefully preserved, and now laid out across a cutting table like something being resurrected for a purpose. "Soo-jin," she said, standing in the doorway. "Is that for me?" Su-jin did not turn around immediately. When she did, her expression was composed, unreadable, the same expression she wore when she had already decided something and simply needed the world to catch up. "It is a family tradition," Su-jin said carefully. "The dress is made for the bride by the mother of the groom. I am simply doing what tradition requires." Zara felt something ease in her chest, something she had been carrying quietly for months without fully naming it. "Thank you," she said, and meant it completely. "This means more to me than you know." Su-jin smiled. "I know exactly what it means," she said. It would be weeks before Zara understood that Su-jin had not lied, not technically. She had simply never said whose name would end up sewn into the lining. What Zara did not see, because she was never meant to see it, was the second fitting, 4 days later, held not in that sewing room, but in Su-jin's private study, where Mi-rae stood in front of a full-length mirror, while Su-jin pinned fabric along her shoulders with the careful, practiced hands of a woman who had been planning this exact moment since the winter Mi-rae first walked back into their lives. "This feels wrong," Mi-rae said quietly, watching herself in the mirror. "She does not even know this is happening." "She will know when it matters," Su-jin said, a pin in her teeth, "not before." Mi-rae's reflection looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "And if he chooses her anyway," she asked, "even after everything?" Su-jin removed the pin from her mouth and met Mi-rae's eyes in the mirror. "Then you will have lost nothing you ever truly had," she said. "But I do not believe that will happen. Men remember where they came from, eventually. Sometimes they simply need to be reminded at the right moment in front of the right people." Mi-rae said nothing further. She had crossed too many small lines by then to find her voice for a large one, and somewhere in the silence of that study she made the choice that would define everything that followed. Not a dramatic choice, not a villain's choice, simply the quiet decision to let something happen rather than stop it, because stopping it by then would have meant admitting how far she had already let herself go. 2 weeks before the wedding, Zara made the sacrifice that would matter more than any other, though she would not learn until much later just how much it had cost her, or how deliberately it had been engineered. A call came from her old firm. The Singapore position had reopened unexpectedly, the original hire falling through, and the recruiter, remembering Zara fondly, offered it again, this time with a signing bonus large enough to make her sit down at her kitchen table and stare at the offer letter for a long time in silence. She did not tell Jin-ho immediately. Instead, she drove to see Su-jin alone on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a decision she had already made and simply needed, for reasons she could not fully explain even to herself, to say out loud to someone. "I am not taking it," Zara said, sitting across from Su-jin at the same kitchen table where so many quiet conversations about her had already taken place without her knowledge. "I am staying, fully, for this family, not just for him." Su-jin studied her for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, "and not him?" "Because I need you to believe I mean it," Zara said, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "I know you have never fully trusted that I belong here. I am not asking you to love me. I am only asking you to see that I am not going anywhere." Something shifted briefly in Su-jin's expression, something that might, in another version of this story, have been the beginning of remorse. "That is a significant sacrifice," Su-jin said quietly. "It is the easiest decision I have ever made," Zara said, and she meant that too. What Zara did not know, could not have known was that this conversation would become, weeks later, the single detail that finally cracked something open in Jin-ho, the moment he would return to again and again once the truth came out, the proof that while his mother had spent 2 years quietly building a replacement, Zara had spent that same 2 years quietly choosing his family over her own future, without ever once asking for credit. Soo-jin never mentioned that conversation to anyone, not to Kyung-hee, not to Mireille. She simply folded it away, the way she folded away everything that did not serve the plan already in motion, and continued sewing. 4 days before the wedding, the final piece fell into place, and it happened with the same quiet, deliberate patience that had defined everything before it. "Zara," Soo-jin said, finding her in the hallway of the hotel where the final preparations were underway, "I need to store your dress in the climate-controlled suite upstairs, the one the hotel reserves for delicate fabric. It is safer there than in your room until the ceremony." "Of course," Zara said, handing over the garment without hesitation, because hesitation by then had long since been trained out of her where Soo-jin was concerned. Soo-jin smiled. "You can trust me," she said. Zara did not see the dress again until the morning of the wedding, when she stood in the bridal suite, already in her makeup, waiting for Claire, the wedding coordinator, to bring the gown up from storage, only to watch Claire return with an expression Zara would remember for the rest of her life. "It is not there," Claire said. "The room is empty. Someone signed it out last night." Zara's hands went still. Signed out by whom? Claire looked down at the log in her hands, and her face changed again. "By your fiancé's mother," she said quietly, "at 9:17 last night." Zara did not scream. She did not cry, not yet. She simply stood very still, like a person stands when the floor beneath them has quietly, silently been removed, and felt every small, dismissed, forgiven moment of the last 2 years arrange themselves, finally, into a single, unmistakable shape. She was already dressed by the time she reached the hall, in a simple ivory dress from her own closet, not the gown Soo-jin had spent months building, and she stood in the doorway just as Soo-jin's voice rang out across 200 waiting guests. "Everyone go ahead and take your seats," his mother announced. "The bride will be down shortly." Zara stepped forward. "I am already here." The room turned. Confusion passed across every face in that hall. His mother's smile did not move. "Oh," she said, "I meant the real one." And that was when the doors at the back of the hall opened, and Mireille walked in wearing white, wearing the exact dress Soo-jin had spent 4 months building in secret, and the room, which had been murmuring in confusion only seconds earlier, fell into total, breathless silence. Jin-ho stood at the altar, and for one terrible second he simply stared, unable to process what his eyes were showing him, his mother on one side of the aisle, wearing satisfaction she had not bothered to hide, and Zara on the other side of the hall, standing perfectly still in a dress that was not the one she had chosen for this day. "What is happening?" he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Someone tell me what is happening right now." Soo-jin stepped forward, composed, unhurried, as though she had rehearsed this exact moment 100 times, because she had. "I made a decision for this family," she said. "Zara has given up a great deal, and I am grateful for it. But Mireille understands what this family requires in ways Zara never fully could. I did this because I love you, and because I believe in time you would have made this same choice yourself." A shaking gasp from the crowd. Jin-ho's face went through something Zara had never seen before. disbelief collapsing into something sharper, colder, as 2 years of small dismissed comments and quiet family dinners rearranged themselves in his mind exactly as they had in Zara's. "You planned this," he said slowly. "How long?" "Since before you proposed," Sujin said, without flinching. "I never believed she was right for you. I simply waited for the moment you would see it too." Mireille stood frozen near the altar, still in the dress, her earlier hesitation now written plainly across her face, because whatever fantasy Su Jin had built for her, standing here in front of everyone, watching Jin Ho's expression, was clearly not it. Jin Ho walked past his mother without another word and crossed the hall to where Zara stood. "Is this true?" he asked, quietly. "Did you know about any of this?" "I found out this morning," Zara said, her voice finally breaking, just slightly, "when my dress disappeared from a locked room your mother controlled the key to." Jin Ho turned back toward Mireille. "Did you know?" he asked, "from the beginning? Did you know what she was doing?" Mireille's silence lasted 3 full seconds, and in this story, that silence answered every question that mattered. "I did not want to hurt anyone," Mireille finally said. "You let this happen for months," Jin Ho said. "That is not the same as not wanting to hurt anyone." He turned to his mother one final time. "Everything Zara gave up for this family," he said, "the job, the years of being talked down to and never once complaining to me about it, and you spent that same time trying to replace her with someone who was never brave enough to say no to you."
Sujin's composure finally cracked, just slightly, at the edges. "I was protecting this family's future," she said. "You were protecting your own comfort," Jin Ho said. "That is not the same thing, either." He walked to Mireille and asked her quietly to remove the dress in the room set aside for the bridal party and to return it, unaided, herself. "Because some things," he said, "a person has to be willing to undo with their own hands if they ever want to be trusted again." She did, in silence, while 200 guests waited outside. And when she emerged in her own clothes, carrying the dress folded over both arms, she did not look at anyone, because there was, finally, nothing left to say that would change what she had allowed herself to become. The wedding did not happen that day. In the weeks that followed, Sujin's justifications shifted the way they always had, from certainty to defensiveness to something that almost resembled regret, though she never once fully apologized for the plan itself, only for how visibly it had failed. Mireille left Chicago quietly 2 months later, taking a position in another city, and sent, before she left, a short letter to Zara that admitted plainly what Sujin never would, that she had known exactly what she was doing and done it anyway, because some part of her had wanted, desperately, to belong somewhere she had never truly earned a place. Zara did not respond to the letter. She kept it, unanswered, in a drawer, because some apologies deserve acknowledgement without requiring forgiveness. 6 months later, Zara and Jin Ho married in a small courtyard with 40 guests. No ballroom, no hidden fabric, no dress sewn by hands that never wanted her there. She wore a simple gown she chose herself with her own money from a small designer studio 2 blocks from the apartment she and Jin Ho now shared. Sujin was not there. Standing at the altar, Jin Ho took Zara's hands and said quietly before the ceremony began, "I spent 2 years believing I understood everything happening around me," he said. "I understood almost nothing. You carried more than I ever knew, and you never once asked me to notice." "I did not need you to notice," Zara said. "You needed me to choose me when it finally mattered, and you did." The dress was never the true prize in this story. It never had been. It was only ever the visible proof of something much larger: trust,
patience, and the quiet, exhausting work of choosing dignity again and again, long after anyone was watching closely enough to reward it. Zara did not win that day because she finally had a dress of her own. She won because through every quiet dismissal and every engineered coincidence, she never once surrendered who she was to earn a place that should have been hers from the very beginning. Do you believe Mireille deserves forgiveness for staying silent, or does silence make her equally responsible? And would you have stayed in a family that spent years trying to quietly replace you? Share your answer and your city in the comments below. If you believe loyalty should be earned honestly and not manufactured in secret, like this video. Subscribe and join us for another story about love, dignity, and the courage to stand your ground.